right, welcome to another cast. Quick note, I forgot to record my intro, so this is going to sound a little bit different than the rest of the program, but today we'll talk about Game of Thrones, at least portion of season 1, uh, and then maybe in the future we'll roll out a few other seasons, but I will not be talking about season 8. So, moving on from that, Katie.
All right. So I am Katie. You can find me around as Sailor Raccoon or look for my podcast that COVID has ruined,
Oof.
which is Sagacity Streets. Um, but it's got a Facebook page and a website, which is Sagacity Street. So totally
Nice.
should check it out
I will
because there's
totally do that.
nothing going on there at all.
Winter is coming, and so am I, and I cannot be stopped. I am Red Iron Riot, aka the War Queen. The first thing I want to say, when it comes to Game of Thrones, I really enjoy the book more than the show. And part of, I am forever going to be disappointed that the show took this world that had magic, it was there, they had tangible tangible remnants of magic, dragons and glass candles, and these descriptions of magnificent dresses, magnificent castles, and they turned it into we're tinting everything brown and throwing mud on the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's the only I'm going to try and stay. That's the only time I'm going to say that. I really disappointed that they went super gross, nitty gritty, mud and dirt, and ugh. I want to try and make that the only time I go off on that tangent.
And I will say that I started to read the first Game of Thrones book, and I was promptly bored into oblivion and gave right the fuck up.
Yes, for me, I actually really loved the first book. For me, it was an absolute page turner from page 1. However, going into book 2, all it was just people having sex and eating food, and it was just milk of the poppy this and milk of the poppy that, and there was nothing happening. And I'm like, this book sucks.
Oof.
I tried to go into book 3, same thing, just fluff, nothing really happens. So I'm like, what the hell? So I just watched the show.
Oof.
The book version of season 1 is better, but obviously I think the seasons beyond that are better for the show. Only because I just couldn't get into the book for the others.
And the books on things is usually, the book's always going to be better.
Yeah.
Or because there's going to be things that get missed. Looking at you, Golden Compass.
Ooh. Wait, I thought the HBO one was better.
Tom
Bombadil. No. The movie was just.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know that. Believe me.
It was a neutered piece of shit.
Oh. Me and my friend watched the movie because we were both real big fans of the books. And at the end of the movie, we're just like, what? That's not what happened. No, what? No.
Well,
yeah.
No, for me, it was one of those things where I got super excited about the casting because Nicole Kidman is the perfect Ice Queen.
Mm-hmm.
But it just got really, really neutered because it is, very heavily religious. And they neutered it into oblivion. So it's one of those where the book's always going to be better, but at least they didn't try to turn it into like a 3-hour movie.
Oof. Yeah, The Hobbit.
Oh.
But turning an entire series of books into the
season
movie.
the episodic show works for a book with multiple books in a series, because it's like season 1 is season 1, season 2 is season 2. And I really gotta agree that I think season 1 of Game of Thrones did the best of following the book, and then it just kind of went off the rails a little bit, and then we ended up with what we ended up with.
You get that with every show. Every show either starts big, or they hit their stride in season 2 or 3, and then it just tapers off, and then you reach that one season where it's like, yeah, that's the season you should have stopped.
Yeah, maybe in 10 years we'll get Game of Thrones Brotherhood, and it'll just be amazing.
I would love a musical version.
A Game of Notes.
I'm down for a musical. I'm down for a musical, man.
Yeah.
I think it could withstand it.
Oh no! In seriousness, that I would agree that'd be amazing, but also part of me is either the Night's Watch or the Unsullied or some group doing a rocket thing, and just
I'm down. Like, the Unsullied would make an excellent,
Ouch.
Replacement for the Rockettes.
Yeah, they can
Ouch.
do the splits.
I mean, like, I would see some serious ballet pieces going on.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, yeah.
But,
With water dancing, Arya and Sirio Pharrell. Oh, that'd be
Hell
tight.
yeah.
So I actually want to note, because obviously it's New Year's Day, although this is gonna air.
There's still people are still shooting fireworks off near my neighborhood. What the heck, guys? I get it.
Either
But come
fireworks or
on.
guns, but of course this will air on the 22nd. But it's New Year's Day. Happy New Year's, everyone.
Hooray!
2021.
We're free.
We're not as free as you think we are.
Let me dream, dang it.
We still have the Lannisters.
Yeah,
So what
It's
inspired,
alright.
what inspired me to do this talk here, specifically season 1, was watching. I just got bored and felt like, you know what? I'm gonna watch episode 1. Because
it's a good episode.
But-
it's a good
but,
episode.
So obviously we start off with the White Walkers,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the watch. Now, one of my favorite things is in Game of Thrones is dealing with obviously just really the medieval aspects. So mainly the Starks, at least as it pertains to Winterfell, and the Night's Watch. But once it goes beyond the wall, then it's kind of like, oh. But it started with the White Walkers, which is a weird concept to me. It's zombies, but they're like 28 days later zombies, but intelligent.
Well, not even
And-
that. Like the whole thing with the White Walkers is that they're supposed to be the Whites and the White Walkers. They're separate, and the White Walkers were only made into, well, they're these weird zombie things. We're calling them all White Walkers because we don't want to confuse people. And
be blue-eyed white dragons.
Although the work they did with the eyes on the Whites, man, that's a sphincter tightener right there. Those eyes.
But specifically, I have no interest in the White Walkers. But the team Rangers going out and investigating the wildlings, obviously they run into the White Walkers instead. But you notice that, and I like the Starks and the Night's Watch specifically how they do this, although they do kind of give me eye rolls. But they're wearing prominently appropriate clothing, right? They're like decked out and thick padded clothing. And they've got the leather and the fur thing going.
And
But
IKEA rugs.
Yeah. But
hey, you could go to IKEA, you could buy a big old chunk of fur for like $50. And I mean, I'm surprised.
Hey, that's clever costuming. It's costuming on a budget. I mean,
Exactly.
props, literally props.
I think the only reason that nobody in our group has done it yet because it's Florida and we don't wear that much fur in our shows. A lot of the armor, not just in the north, but just throughout the Seven Kingdoms that you see and the stuff that you see that shows up in Essos, I love their armor because one, it most of it is pretty. I want to say it is pretty realistic for what armor should be.
Yeah.
And two, it's also got some the accoutrements for like in the Game of Thrones world. Badges and emblems are so important to the society.
Yeah.
They have it seemed like to me they made an effort to show that, well, this is integrated into the armor because the way they have the clasps to hold their cloaks, so that it's like it's not this weird right on the shoulder. It's actually it goes over the shoulder and attaches like right above the armpit. It seems like that actually works very well, and I like that. And that's
that's the thing. It's like from a historical perspective, the armor in the shows is solid. It is a decent representation of medieval armor. As I mean, the
give or take, yeah, absolutely. I think it's more.
My one gripe is that a lot of the armor that the North uses is this weird brigandine style of leather. Like if you look at the stuff, like I think the stuff that Rob wears near the end of the season is the best example. It looks like a brigandine. It's got shaped plates. It's got rivets, but it's a super weird brigandine. And every time I see it, I'm like, that's so weird.
My guess is it's entirely plausible that a lot of the cloth or so that would have otherwise covered brigandine didn't preserve as well. So people that are going out and actually finding these probably at first thought it was some sort of metal or leather kind of thing because that's kind of what it presented at first. Well, leather, there's very little evidence of leather, and there's way too much leather in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
But the brigandine metal plates kind of thing.
Yeah.
I can imagine if the cloth just didn't preserve well enough on a lot of those.
Well, you just said this. You said this earlier, Kitty, where it was like milk of the poppy this and milk of the poppy that. The term boiled leather comes up a lot in the Game of Thrones book. I swear, like it really does, and it's really funny that it's just like boiled leather, boiled leather, boiled leather.
That should be a really good tongue twister for like red leather, yellow leather, boiled leather.
Oh man,
boiled leather,
Interesting.
broiled leather.
Oh, this just gives me the shit. This just gives me the oogies for a minute, just like. Ugh.
But going back in terms of the North, specifically the Night's Watch, which look really good for where they are, obviously with exception of the predominance of their leather, but otherwise they look good, or the fur. And but going back down just a little bit to the Starks, or at least Winterfell itself, I've got a couple images up, but obviously by memory. But a lot of people, in fact, it's mostly just padded armor. There's some stuff over it. Obviously, the main characters have their motorcycle jackets and their spike and angel leather coats, but everybody is just about wearing padded or cloth armor. That looks awesome. And then everyone looks like really good in like a northern environment. Going back and watching it, I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised at how it all looked kosher.
I mean, go ahead, Katie. Sorry.
No, I mean, and I like the fact that they managed to walk that fine line between this is aesthetically pleasing and this is functional. And everything that you see, I mean, I can look at it and be like, nah, that would work. That is a functional, they would stay warm. They would, and it kind of lends itself to as well is, when you get into the battles and that sort of thing. I mean, the battles themselves have their problems.
Yeah.
But as far as scale and that sort of thing but a lot of, the injuries that were suffered, it's not, they beat the shit out of each other and you bleed to death inside your armor from internal injuries. And they, it's that functional that they kind of represented really well with that, where like, no, like you would look okay, kind of, and then you took the armor off and you're all black and blue underneath.
The only thing I really didn't notice, or the only thing I noticed isn't represented as much in Winterfell and the Night's Watch, is chainmail.
Well, and that's kind of what I was thinking too. Is like George R.R. Martin, specifically, talks in interviews and stuff about like the War of the Roses, which puts you past the medieval period. That puts you like in kind of early modern age, which is like Renaissance.
Yeah.
So I mean, and if you're also thinking too from a practical perspective, never mind the time frame, but if you're dealing with a lot of, archery and that sort of thing, chainmail sucks defending against archery.
True. But yeah, of course, in Game of Thrones,
plate armor is going to do better.
Exactly, you get a lot of plate armor, especially in, and I'm really bad at the city names, but where the Lannisters live, is there's a lot of plate.
King's Landing. Yeah,
and a lot of course, more advanced equipment and weapons, and so chainmail just isn't going to work out that way. But it looks like the North specifically is a much more early medieval setting. And then as you go further south, it starts to become more Renaissance and modern.
Right. Well, I think that's supposed to be a big point of this is the culture of the North and this is the culture of the South. And the South, you've got knightly chivalry and more traditional knight style stuff. And the North is not that. But it's actually a point I wanted to bring up is just like not just the difference of the styles in armor, but also the difference of styles in the day-to-day wear. You see this a lot with Catelyn. You see this a lot with happen a lot with Sansa. like if you look at the lineup in the first episode or first or second episode where they're all lining up to meet the king,
Exactly.
Everybody's mostly pretty much in fur and leather, except you've got Sansa and Catelyn. But Sansa's much more, this is the style of a southern lady, and Catelyn's more, I've lived in the north and I've been a mother to northern children, much more reserved, but the style is still there. And
yeah, of course, because Kat isn't from the north. She's a Tully, I believe,
which is basically one of the most central kingdoms in Westeros. We see this happen in the course of the early course of the war. They're the first ones. They're the first place to ally with the North beyond. They're related to the North. It's also right there when it comes to the North. It's the North, the Riverlands, and then to the east of the Riverlands is the Vale of Arryn. To the west is Lannister territory, the Westerlands, and then you have King's Landings and the Crown Lands, the Reach, Stormlands, and then Dorne.
God, you're a nerd.
I'm a hot nerd, baby.
But no, I mean, you also have to, thinking from a plot perspective, you also have Sansa. She's like 13, 14 at this point, maybe 15 tops.
In the
13,
book,
13.
Yes, but I think in the
show she looks like 17, but she's
they aged up a lot of the characters for the show because they didn't want to squeak people out.
But I mean, at the same time, she's a teenage girl. She's very impressionable. She, you're gonna, if you're hanging out with like a bunch of like the cool kids and that sort of thing.
She to an extent, obviously, to me, Sansa, at least early season, is very intolerable, but she comes off as someone who's in a quote unquote sort of cockney or poor lifestyle as opposed to what she wants. So it comes to me as something like Little Mermaid, who wants to go up to land, and she wants
to be where the people are.
And then she finally does, and then it's like, obviously for Sansa, it's a completely different story than the Disney version of Mermaid. Ugh. But she comes across as that. That to me makes sense. She's one of the only people there she just feels like she's tired of all the mud and the grime and the muck of the North, and she's ready to live like she thinks people do
in the South. Yeah, which
actually is a pretty solid segue into. One thing I definitely wanted to talk about was the lifestyles that are depicted in Game of Thrones versus the actual kind of historical what their lives were actually like.
Yeah.
That kind of the big thing that gets me is one of my big kind of gripey bits is, I mean, yeah, you've got battles that are just not feasible for actual medieval times. Like nobody had armies that big, and it's not sustainable. But you also have kind of that wanton killing of peasants.
And you don't do that
for shits and giggles, and they didn't really do that. I mean, a lot of the wars were for religious reasons. The bigger ones were,
well, if you don't have peasants, who's going to grow your food?
Exactly. So like if the wars weren't regarding religious problems, it was scuffles over territory and economic control.
Something entertainment industry completely does not understand, or I'll mention before and again, I don't think they even do any research on medieval history, but they don't realize everybody had a job, and if you weren't doing that job in your hamlet, town, city, whatever, castle,
it wasn't getting done.
That would be an absolute hindrance to everyone. And a lot of people had multiple jobs. So peasants were really the backbone of society back then. And it was like killing a chicken. You didn't kill your chicken because they laid eggs. The only way you did that is if you really had to, or if you were super rich and did not care.
Or stop laying.
That's one of the problems with the book versus the show, is that the book kind of does a little more showing the peasants actually, the small folks suffering during these wars, but the show it's all about the fighting and the monsters and the sexy times.
Yeah. What I like is when Robert Baratheon is coming, and it shows, of course, the depiction of how kings travel and what that is like and how tasking that is on a small village or even a city like Winterfell.
Mm-hmm.
They make small talk, of course, in the show, but they do notice how it's tasking on them. They're eating through our wares, and we might not have enough to get through winter, this and that. And that's exactly how it was. A lot of times, people would turn away the king by claiming that the village was sick with like leprosy or something, because a traveling lord or especially a king could have just absolutely destroyed a village.
Well, and it's one of those things where it's, if you're squabbling over economic control over an area, you don't want to get rid of your economy, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and you don't want to ruin it for, your future, prospects of that area. So I mean, and actually, I guess during a lot of the religious wars or religious-based wars, they would force, the armies, which once again were significantly smaller than what Game of Thrones has access to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, their army sizes are more of what you would see during Renaissance times, but their tactics are more of the Roman style. Um, but a lot of the armies and whatnot, would take oaths to, you don't touch the peasantry. It would happen sometimes, but it was very much one of those where it's like, no, don't. I mean, yeah, okay, they may occasionally get their village raided for food and supplies and stuff, but it wasn't just like, it'd be really fun. Let's light this whole valley on fire.
Let's just let Clegane loose on them and have fun with that. Nope.
YOLO. Wasn't a thing though.
Fire.
It just was not it was not
Oof.
a practical thing for them to do, and
Not at all.
therefore they did not do it.
Quick notation. I wanted to mention earlier when we were actually talking about costuming, one thing egregious that I noticed in this watch back of episode 1 was people having full metal shields with their heraldry on them, and they're just holding them up like it's a dainty wooden shield. I'm like, I don't know how practical that is.
It almost kind of reminds me of like, let's cosplay, like let's have Renaissance people cosplay as medieval people. If that makes
Ooh,
sense.
ouch.
But no,
It's
I
just
mean,
like,
it's not. It's just like, let's pick and choose the bits and pieces that we like, and we're just, we're gonna pick and choose what we want out of here, and okay, we're gonna have the pretty costumes and the armor of the Renaissance because it was a lot more aesthetically pleasing.
and the
Mm-hmm.
plate armor of the 15th century.
Medieval times were boring. I mean, people, it is. It's, you had a lot of like little battles and wars and stuff, but I mean, people were, it wasn't, I mean, yeah, you had festivals and parades and, religious
Tournaments and
holidays and
stuff,
stuff like
but
that, but it wasn't as thrilling as Game of Thrones.
Actually,
or
that's something that always struck me about the North too, is that when in the books and in the show, we're given this, the North is not as flamboyant as the South. They don't do tournaments, but it's like they should at least be doing something, right? If it's
well,
winter for most of the year, you
I'm
know,
sure. I mean, we don't really get a lot of Winterfell, at least in first season, or at least in terms of their culture throughout the entire show. But I presume off camera, off book, as a culture, they would do something, even if it's something small. Obviously, nothing as big as a King's Tourney in King's Landing,
hmm
but I imagine one having Robert Baratheon come to the city is an event in itself.
Oh yeah, they'd have activities and events, and like I said, a lot of this stuff was based around religion during medieval times.
Yeah,
So you don't see that in Game of Thrones as much, but I mean, you get whiffs of religion and that sort of thing, but it's kind of in passing.
it's more focused on very specific religious characters like the Red
Hmm.
Lady, and just small snippets of specific religious aspects.
like the stories
the
we get from old Nan when she's
yep, the faceless man, that
oh
whole culture and basically like a religion around that. And that whole aspect. Really the biggest draw I think of Game of Thrones, it's that it's an opera. It's political. It's all of these characters scheming against one another, whether they're vying for the throne or not.
except
And
Ned Stark,
that really
baby.
comes into play in King's Landing as soon as we get there. Of course, you get the Cersei and Jaime. You know, they don't want to get caught for what they've done, but they're also trying
Banging.
to. Well, I mean, killing John Aaron. I don't care
that
about
too.
Well,
spoilers.
no. John Aaron wasn't them. It was Littlefinger,
What a douche.
right?
But he has a little finger.
He
But,
has slender and graceful fingers, among other things.
And Varys
Everyone
the
says
fighter.
his little fingers are very slender and graceful and long, very long.
Yeah.
But no, that wasn't the Lannisters. That was Littlefinger framing the Lannisters.
Yes.
Because
but also,
oh boy, that is one whole Gordian knot of politics.
But also Jeremy and Jaime and Jeremy. Cersei and Jaime. Jeremy changed genders. Cersei and Jaime didn't like Robert and how he was running things, and they wanted things differently. The Lannisters wanted things differently. Again, part of that world, and then the way it is isn't quite.
Well, you say the Lannisters, but at the point where you're talking about, that's mostly Tywin Lannister wanting that. Cersei and Jaime just originally just wanted to bang, and then when Robert was dead, Cersei's like, "Oh, I can be in charge now. I can be a queen. Heck yeah!" And
which is actually a really interesting point to kind of bring it back to the historical aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Was that, depending what country you were in, France versus England and that sort of things, it wasn't uncommon, for the up and coming, too young to be the king, but technically he's the king.
Joffrey,
his mother would be
the regent,
the regent, and have that control. But then you go over to other places, and like the uncles or that sort of thing would have that control. They wouldn't be. There's no need to snipe over each other. They'll have control for,
and
5-10 years and get a bunch of money out of it and power. And
in some places it was a little different, like King Tutankhamun, which brings me to the other messed up half of season 1, which was the dominant male fantasy aspect of Game of Thrones, which is Daenerys Targaryen. That whole thing. At the early portion, and watching, I'm like, this is such a male dominance fantasy, and I can't imagine saying yes to this.
Yeah.
But you're also thinking of it with modern eyes. If you, once again, we kind of go back and like try looking at, these things
because that is how it was.
Women were property. They were, there are a handful of women who had power over their lives and, some sort of control over their lives. But a lot of the times women were there, to be pretty and,
have babies.
To be pretty, have sons, specifically sons, to, be political bargaining chips.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have a lot of control over their lives.
Yeah. It's just like the one thing that squicks me out the most is that in the real world, a lot of people who don't actually know it like to point, well, they married their kids off and they were like 13, 14. It's like they betrothed their children when they were, young, 10, 12, 13, 14. They didn't expect their children to get married, bang, and have kids at that age. That is not how it went.
Yeah, I believe that the kind of age of you can actually be a married couple was like 14 or 15.
And even then, they're like, it was not
for like royalty and whatnot.
Yeah, for royalty, 100%. It was everybody else. No royalty. It was like you said, the daughters are bargaining chips for political power. They're there to look pretty, and it
have sons.
To me, my issue is she's naked in just about every scene. Like, you don't need that, but it is painful watching this character be treated as literally nothing more than an object.
The piece of meat.
Just about the entire season. until she begins to slowly grow. And it's kind of
And smother her husband with a pillow.
Yeah. He deserved
Spoiler
it.
alert.
He deserved it.
Oof.
But
Well, he was dying.
yeah. But other things.
Well, he wasn't dying. He was just brain dead.
Oh, I'm sorry. He was just a vegetable.
And it kind of juxtaposes with Sansa in her story. Obviously, Daenerys didn't want what was forced on her. She didn't want that lavish lifestyle or anything. She just kind of wanted to go home.
Mhm.
Whereas Sansa did want it. And then Sansa obviously was a nightmare. Whereas
Yeah.
Daenerys, she had to actually work, edge, and chip away at becoming what she eventually became. Of course, that got squandered, but the story of her and Sansa are
They're
incredibly
good parallels. They're good
Yeah.
parallels. Like, and I'm gonna. We're kind of in this topic of discussion. I'm gonna go. Catelyn Stark is an amazing character, and she made mistakes, but I understand why why a good portion of the fandom greatly dislike her in the show and in the books. Like, she is honestly a lot of times public enemy number one because how she treats Jon, and how people will turn this into, well, she hated Jon because because it's like, no, this is her society. This is the society. He is a bastard child technically, and he is a threat to her children.
And he's embarrassing. Like, oh, you can't keep your husband happy?
There's that. It's so when people try to point at Catelyn Stark and say she's a bad character because she treated Jon like this and because she made these mistakes, it's not and acting like it's like it's some horrible thing. It's like that. Catelyn Stark's character is an amazing character and
very strong, very strong character.
If we're gonna go into more seasons, I'm gonna this is gonna tear. I'll go on forever.
The biggest flaw of all of the Starks, including Jon,
is honor.
Obviously, exactly, is their blind honor, and Catelyn is absolutely a strong-willed character. She's a strong woman, and she is honor. She is honored to the core, but she's also human, and I love that they played her like that. Of course, her treatment of Jon is cringeworthy because you're supposed to like Jon, but it's completely understandable. This is
it's legitimate
to her knowledge.
Unlike Jon.
Yeah.
But I'm fish.
Yeah, to her knowledge, this is someone her husband had, outside of wedlock, outside of being with her. And that's why she hated the idea of him going back with Robert, because she didn't want something like that happening again and losing faith in her husband. And Jon is the biggest representation of that. So I completely understand it, and that kind of thing happens today, and it happened back then too.
And just I Catelyn Stark's character and her story is just so amazing, and we see that in season 1. We lose it in the later season, but we see her be this. She's doing what a wife and a mother is supposed to do in this time frame. Even in the real world, we'd see that. We see this in the real world, right?
Yeah.
In real world medieval examples, I'm pretty sure we see this a lot. And I just it just grind, like I want to say it grinds my gears when people act like Catelyn Stark is just some sort of monster for acting the way she acts.
Okay, so in that regard, at least in pertaining to season 1, because obviously characters get killed off and we're introduced to new characters. Moving on, but for season 1, who is everyone's favorite character or arc?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Katie.
Ooh.
Trying to remember what the hell his name is.
What did he do?
I want to say Varys.
Varys.
Oh, Varys.
Who?
Deity's brother.
Yeah.
Viserys.
Oh, Viserys. Yeah.
There we go. He's got a pretty solid character arc.
Oh boy.
Yeah, he is intensely intolerable, and
no, he is an absolute just turd waffle, and he gets what he had coming, and it's satisfying. It's good.
Yeah, no, he absolutely had to die in order for Daenerys to finally be free of the shackles of her past, kind of thing.
But also his death is just
satisfying.
It really is.
Joffrey Just like
It really
Joffrey
is.
later on, of course. I like that they make these intolerable characters because people are intolerable in real life.
And I'm glad that you got enough of him to realize, like, okay, Danny is surrounded. You know, They showed
She comes
enough
from
of.
crazy. She comes from
She
crazy.
comes from crazy, and it kind of sets up for her to be a better person.
You understand where
But
she comes from and why she's doing what she's doing.
Exactly. But then you don't get so much of him that you're like, oh my god, will somebody just please murder this dude yet?
Like Joffrey.
Yeah. Although I will say, Joffrey too is one of
Yeah.
those where by the time he died, I think everybody was real happy about that.
Right.
And but you got enough of this kind of smaller, you know, he was important, but he's not important to the overall storyline. He's important to her backstory, so more so. And so you got enough of him, but then a satisfying death.
We see through Viserys just like how like the all that we hear about the Targaryens and the Mad King and possibly Rhaegar was just like were the rest of the Targaryens really this bad? You get that without having to have a whole backstory, you know, a whole separate, you know, season of backstory for how the Targaryens
like
were absolutely butt nuts.
Arrogant title family line kind of thing.
He's the Cliff Notes version for the family. He's the Cliff Notes for the family.
He's the Karen of the Targaryens. The Targaryens.
Targaryens. Cargarians? Can we call them the Cargarians?
Oh, I think I took damage.
Targaryens.
I've taken physical damage from that. Why do you make me suffer?
I will say one thing I like, since you did mention, you know, Arya and Sansa. I do like in this season how they really kind of put their personalities out there that really followed them through the rest of the show. Of, you know, Arya is just by her nature more independent and more of a kind of free thinker.
She'll fight you. She'll fight you.
But she's just by her nature, and for better or worse, because that gets her into a lot of unnecessary trouble at points later on. But she's got her way of dealing with all of this turmoil and tumult that that's going on is to kind of rebel against it and kind of to kind of fight against everything that's going on. And then versus Sansa, her way of kind of dealing with everything is to just kind of go with the flow. And, you know, like when in Rome, do your hair the same way as your soon-to-be mother-in-law. And
Sansa reminds me of Elfwyn, daughter of Alfred, who, you know, was married off to Mercia and was dealing in the wars of the Vikings in Mercia, and then she had to come into her own in some way, shape, or form. And Arya reminds me of kind of, I want to say Joan of Arc, but not necessarily the holier than thou kind of religious figure aspect. More so trying to come into her own in a world that is just not for her. That she's rejected completely and rejects her. So she's having to find single-handedly, branching off real quick, I think that those two characters are the way we really actually learn and see Westeros, because they're the only two characters that really see and discover and experience everything firsthand. Like Daenerys is just, we're fantasy dragons and titties, whereas Catelyn and the North, you know, the brothers, they're all like medieval stuff, very, you know, close, tight knit medieval. I hate Bran,
and the brothers are
seeing Bran's in because I don't give a damn.
They did Bran so dirty. Oof.
I don't even like the character. Anyway, but Sansa and Arya, to me, you know, they encapsulate the idea of Westeros and what the show is about.
And I think they're also just generally, as characters go, they're more relatable.
Yeah.
Because you can say, you know, a way of dealing with our society is, you know, if you're in, you know, dealing with really tumultuous things and whatnot, is you can go and you can fight against it and, you know, spend all your energy arguing, which is, it's a valid way of dealing with things. And you can go out
you can be
and
very
fight,
calm.
or you can
out of the way and then
punches.
Get somebody else to do it for you. Oof.
I mean, what two characters throughout the entire show actually had any character development besides Arya and Sansa? Daenerys Well, I mean, at first,
Well,
but
she came
I mean,
into her own.
Her
It
entire
took a
arc
while.
at some point was just, I'm Khaleesi, you need to do what I do, or I'm gonna kill you. You know,
Well, she figures out that doesn't work eventually.
You know, the Lannisters are, we're rich, so we're gonna kill you. Jamie has a very powerful and changing arc, but then of course season 8, and I've never watched season 8, but of course that turns it around, so that doesn't count to me.
No,
Tyrion is
season
the
8.
same character from season 1 to season 8. Jon is the same character from season 1 to season 8.
I would say Tyrion. They all have
Minor
character arcs, except maybe Jon.
Yeah, Jon's just.
Jon's probably the least developed of all of the characters. Tyrion kind of. I don't even actually know so much if he's got a character arc or if it's just more we learn more about him to see that he really is not just a little douchebag.
This is one of the cases where the books do it a lot better. In the show, he got pigeonholed real quick into I'm smart and I'm snarky and I drink and that's all I got to do. In the books, he goes through a whole lot more than
but at
what
least he gets to keep his nose in the show.
Yeah, he is messed up. He becomes Quasimodo.
Yeah. Well, there's another thing for it too. It's like, again, the show, it wants to be this gross, gritty, brown tinted medieval fantasy, but also everybody's beautiful. Everybody has beautiful faces and nice hair and no body hair except for the guy.
Have you seen The Hound?
The Hound is a different case because that's the Hound's character. We're talking like most of the nobles are still, we're still this pretty clean. And we're not gonna, show these grievous wounds and the war and
basically
people suffering.
To narrow that down, everyone looks like, well, obviously everyone's got to be pretty for TV, but
yeah,
it looks like how people looked like in medieval and Renaissance paintings because nobody wanted their imperfections to be shown. So if you actually went back and looked at Robert the Bruce, Alfred, and all of these other medieval characters, they probably looked maybe not everybody,
poor Anne
not
of
everybody,
Cleves.
but
poor Anne of Cleves done dirty by a painting. Well, I guess they did her better by the painting,
but just that general thing. I want to say for my character, I have to say Tyrion. I really liked his. I did like his story of here. He's got a position where he's got power technically by his family name, but that's really all he has. And the way it's, this is how he, his story of how he navigates the world around him by, well, this dude can fight. Hey, dude, let's make a deal. And
diplomacy,
baby. It's I out of season 1, it's between him and Catelyn for me. And then they collide together. So one thing I did want to bring up because it's I kind of touched on it earlier is in the Game of Thrones world, emblems and badges and house colors are such a big thing.
Heraldry, yeah.
The heraldry of it is just such a big thing, and it's a really weird parallel because in Game of Thrones, there's not there's no divisions and quartering of heraldry, which is what we see in the regular world. If you like, for example, the heraldry of England, it eventually, it started out with just the lions, and then as Scotland and Ireland were absorbed, it got quartered and everything. So the UK, the sigil they use for the UK, it's that shield that's quartered in four different ways, and you don't see that anywhere in Game of Thrones until Cersei starts doing it for her children because and wanting to hold on to. She's she doesn't think of herself as a Baratheon. She's a Lannister. She's she's only Baratheon. She's only married to a Baratheon. She's not a Baratheon. She's only married to one. And
she only played one on TV.
Yeah. So on a final note, because this episode will be slightly different instead of pictures of ourselves or our profile photos, I'm putting our respective chosen heraldry from the houses on the shields. So just a final note then is, why did you choose the herald that you chose? We'll start with Katie.
I'll let Amy go first.
Oh no, I don't have a very good. So House Lannister. I could easily say, oh, Winterfell because the North is cool and they're so pragmatic, but House Lannister, as we see it, and where the time frame is in Game of Thrones, is in such a weird place. You have the story of Tywin and how he just so clings onto his nothing else, just his family's reputation, nothing else. And how he won't let go of Jaime's in the Kingsguard. You're not getting anything else from him. You're your daughter's the queen. Your grandchildren, quote unquote. I mean, I guess technically they still are his grandchildren, but your grandchildren are going to be kings. Your house is the legacy of your house is pretty secure, and all you've got left is Tyrion, and it just makes the way he just treats Tyrion's like, you might not like it, but he's still technically your heir, boy. You got to deal with it, and I vibe with that.
Of course, his grandchildren eventually become ground children.
Ow.
Katie.
Ow.
So I picked Greyjoy because I like their Kraken. It's crack-a-lackin'. And in the show, I really loved Yara. She was she was badass. She was a genuine bamf. And I also liked Theon. He was kind of a little prick, and he had a really nice over the whole series, had a nice redemption kind of as things went. Also my Hyundai, my beloved old Hyundai, I named it Reek.
Oh no.
Because sometimes it was really awful and dirty and kind of smelled weird, and was maybe a little flaky and didn't always do what it was supposed to do. But at the end of the day, it handled itself, and it was it was reliably unreliable, but reliable still.
Yeah.
So, and it was also gray colored and brought me joy. So it was an appropriate name. But I also, like I said, I like Dara. I like, that her whole family is really super frustrating. But, if you're going to say, when I grow up, I want to be like this character from Game of Thrones, Dara's not a bad one.
No, I can vibe with that.
And also, by our powers, we survive. I don't know.
That's a good way
Something
to put
that
it.
just kind of forgot, right? For me, I actually took longer than it should have to think of it, because I don't particularly attach to any real family in Game of Thrones. Obviously, some characters I like more than others, but I don't particularly stick to any family. But I chose the Starks, Winterfell heraldry, mainly because the North, as I already mentioned in the podcast earlier, is predominantly a more subdued and tight-knit medieval aspect of Game of Thrones, that I like a bit more than King's Landing and Daenerys with the Khal and the White Walkers with the North. It was a toss-up though between the Starks and the Night's Watch, but ultimately I'm like, this more subdued kind of down-to-earth level is more my style than we're fighting zombies and then we sneak out and have prostitutes.
Doesn't. Who doesn't? That's called a Friday night. Speaking of which, I think I'm late.
Alrighty. So that will be this episode. I'm sure we'll talk ad nauseum at some point. Again, Game of Thrones. But
there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Maybe the next one actually, the podcast itself, not Game of Thrones, but talk about heraldry, because that's intensely interesting. But
and there's a lot to it.
There is so much to it. It is my jam.
Your peanut butter jelly. But I'm NC.
So go check out Sagacity Street. Eventually, I will have stuff up on there. It's on Facebook. If you go to www.sagacitystreet.com, it will take you to my Facebook page.
You never know.
And I have business cards to use, so we'll figure it out. We'll get some episodes in the can.
And I have been your lovable trash mammal screaming at the night, Red Iron Riot, aka the War Queen.